Okay, hello. Welcome to the Summer Institute for Garden-Based Teaching 2020 virtual edition. This year is strange. Classes do not look like they usually look, and it is very likely that our teaching, our coworkers, our students, our families, our communities will all be struggling with the burdens of COVID-19, the pandemic, and the systemic injustices that are being fully exposed right now. During these times, we are of course facing questions and challenges like those we've never experienced. There is a restorative power in a connection to nature, in knowing where our food is grown, and in supporting the curiosity, joy, and enthusiasm that gardens can bring out in all of us. That is part of what the Summer Institute is designed to highlight this year. That we can use gardens as a catalyst for positive development and change in our students and our communities. Next slide. Gotta move my own next slide. This is the first of our live sessions. As you'll note in the schedule here, each Thursday will be a live webinar that will be recorded. If you missed the webinar, you'll be able to watch it in the future or share it with others. You just won't be able to participate in the polls or the questions or any of those things that happen. The following Tuesday will be a corresponding discussion session. We'll break out into smaller groups for discussion, and those sessions will not be recorded. That's just for the people and the teachers that show up on that day. At the end of this call, we'll also share more with you about the whole breadth of the Summer Institute and all of the available options. Next slide, please. So for some housekeeping, we are recording so that we can share this into the future. So please keep your microphones muted. We will upload this webinar to Schoology, the course website that you have probably seen in the emails. Questions and comments, please put them in the chat box. And we'll make some time to answer some of them throughout, as well as at the end of the webinar. We will occasionally ask questions over a poll in Zoom, or we'll also use the website slido.com. So when we do use those tools, we'll prompt you how to participate. And if you can't participate because your technology is not allowing you that day, it's okay. Next slide, please. So today, we have an excellent team of presenters from across the district. My name is Brianne Studer. I am the Director of Programs for Friends of the National Arboretum and Washington Youth Garden. I've been a formal and informal educator for over 15 years, always with a focus on providing hands-on, experiential education in outdoor settings. And with me today, we have Rhonda Ferguson, a DC native and graduate of DCPS and Howard University, now serving as a teacher leader at Turner Elementary School. Lola Bloom is also here, co-founder of City Blossoms and now Director of Food and Wellness at DC Bilingual. Allie Arnold also joins us. She's a former food corps service member at KIPP-Webb Campus and now is Washington Youth Garden's program manager focused on school garden partnerships. And with her is Dwayne Thomas, KIPP-Webb Campus's current food corps service member, as well as a DC native and a parent of a student at KIPP-Webb Campus. And as many of you know, Sam Ullery is a school garden specialist for the Office of the State Superintendent of Education and is a champion of school gardens across the district and beyond. Sam has been instrumental in every version of the Summer Institute so far, and we're thankful to have him on today. Next slide, please. So the tag for this presentation was why do school gardens matter? What school gardens with purpose? So let's start with why does why matter? School gardens can be really big undertakings. They can involve a lot of different staff, students, and community members, and we have to find a way to ground all of us in the work that we do first. It's the summertime. Many of you are probably already wondering, how am I going to teach my students this year? What am I going to teach my students this year? What do I want them to learn? And this year, You have the additional challenge of thinking about the adverse social and emotional impacts, and certainly the academic impacts of remote learning and mixed learning that's going to happen. Gardens are often not the first element of a school our communities are focused on, but certainly they can be a part of learning this year like it is every year. And this requires even more than normal that we start with an impactful why. So starting with why, it allows you to get people on the same page. It allows you to get them excited about being part of your team and what you're trying to accomplish together. And it also helps you decide on what you will do. I'm sure I don't need to tell you twice, resources are tight, whether that is time or money or people power. We do not exist in a world where we have all of the resources that we want to do everything that we want to do. But if you have your why and the impact that you really want to make first, it'll allow you to focus your efforts on these activities and really help you achieve that impact. We're going to introduce you to the concept today of logic models, which is really just a way of starting with your why, organizing your process around what are you trying to accomplish, what is the impact you want to make. So to get us thinking about where you all are in that process, I'm going to throw up a poll right now. Have you ever created a logic model or used backward design, aka started with your why, to plan curriculum or a program? And I'll give everybody a minute or two to answer. Awesome, I'm gonna share these results now so you guys can see. We have a lot of people who are familiar with the concept of starting with their why, and they're interested in learning more about why to do this and how to do this. That's awesome. That's a great place to be right now. I'm gonna stop sharing that. Next slide, please. Well, if we're going to talk about why, we have to start with the why for the Summer Institute. So the Summer Institute for Garden-Based Teaching, you may have noticed when you received one of the first emails from me last week or this week, at the very bottom, we have our vision, which is our why. And our vision is for school gardens and healthy local food to be a fundamental part of each school, led by the school community and integrated into a school's culture and learning environment. It was crucial that we started with this why for this program, especially in this year, because as you know, in March, everything about how we thought we were going to run this program had to change. And being able to start from this place of knowing our why allowed us to revisit, how do we do the Summer Institute? How is this going to run this year to serve this purpose? Next slide, please. So this is an example of a logic model template. A logic model, as I mentioned before, is simply a tool to help you organize your thoughts and plan a program. There are so many in the world. There are different formats, there are different types of framing them. Sometimes you'll see them configured in the reverse direction where the impact or the long-term goals are on the opposite side. If that serves you best, definitely there are other examples out here. But for today, as we think about our garden programs, this is the template that we're going to use. So for this example, think of the far left as what your students will have achieved because of the garden after your work with them is over. You're no longer working with those students, but that garden is still having an impact on them. Then in the next column, short-term outcomes, it's what will they have achieved during their time working with you? What are their outcomes? What's the learning? What's the social emotional goals that you want them to achieve during that? And then the activities and outputs is How will you achieve that? What will they do? What is the specifics of how this will run? And then the far two right columns is what do you need to be able to make that happen? What is the materials, the resources, the people to make that happen? For today, we're going to focus on the left three columns of this logic model, the why and the how. And we'll see three examples of different school gardens in action and learn how they continue to craft their school gardens based on their personal and their school community why. But before we do that, it's always very important for us to think about our personal why for school gardens. And so I'm going to take a second and share with you all a Slido that we are going to make a word cloud of. So give me just a second. All right. Do you all see the Slido on the screen? Okay, so you can go to slido.com, slido.com, and then you're going to enter this code, 89493. And that will allow you to enter into the cloud and add your own, what is your own why? What is the impact you want to have on young people in the garden? We've got some good ones coming in. Mindfulness, creativity, appreciation, joy, hands-on science, empowerment, self-sufficiency, love of nature, justice, voice, engagement, creativity, service to the community, food justice, peace, resilience, peaceful learning space. This is great. I'm going to keep this poll open for a little bit. If more things come up to you in the next little bit and you haven't been able to get them in yet, I will share the final word cloud in a little bit. But one thing is obvious. There are many different whys to this work, and how we dig into it is really a wonderful mix of things that we see and hear. But you've heard enough from me. And it is time now to have some of our real school garden experts share with you all a little bit about their why and what that looks like in their school. So I'm going to stop sharing and pass it over to Rhonda Ferguson from Turner Elementary.
Hello, everyone. I had to unmute myself. All right, I am Rhonda Ferguson. I am a teacher, early childhood over at Turner Elementary School, which is located at Alabama Avenue and Stanton Road Southeast. On your screens, you should see a picture of our lovely garden, which started back in like 2014 or 15. And it started with a group of teachers. Those teachers you see right there in the garden, our science teacher, our art teacher, our PE teacher, our science Spanish teacher had a green thumb and literally went in and decided to turn our space into an outdoor space for growing vegetation and a learning space. During that time frame, it evolved, and she created beds for us to grow vegetation. We were able to raise funds and get a lawnmower. And our art teacher got super creative. In the back, you can see it's a pyramid. The children were able to create artwork back there. What you see on the wall is a mural. Another community partner stepped in, No Kings Collective. I was able to find the name, actually came and painted a mural for us in our school garden. So our garden, which started almost about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, really began as a labor of love from teachers with interests. In that time frame, as it evolved, we were lucky enough to have the opportunity to work with OSSE and Washington Youth Garden and attend this very summer institute and training and learn so much more about just how meaningful a garden can be, and had the opportunity to think about the things that we could do to revamp our garden and to really make it what we wanted it to be. So kind of like when we think about when we design our classrooms, every school year we walk into classrooms and you may walk into a space that's already designed or one that has nothing, and then we take and we all make it magical because that's what we do as teachers. And so we had the opportunity to take a look at our garden and think about what could we do to make it greater, make it a greater space for outdoor learning, and create even more opportunities for learning experiences beyond the classroom space. So what started out as just basically growing vegetables and just an exciting, like this experience, just because of teachers, began to evolve into something even more. Next slide, please. So because we were able to partner so closely with OSSE and the Washington Youth Garden, and we learned so much in our time there, we were able to start thinking about what do we want as a vision for our own garden. So here you see pictures. We just basically started doing our own research of like, okay, what would we do if we could really transform our garden? Yes, we wanted to grow vegetables, and we were like, we also want to have herbs in there that smell really nice. And what if we could create these paths for walking and create like this ultimate kind of experience of like a peaceful, tranquil kind of outdoor learning? And so we just thought about, okay, this is what we want. Now, how do we go about creating it? And we just researched and came up with these wonderful ideas along the way of things that we could do to think about creating a space that we really wanted to see in our garden beyond just the everyday that we'd already started with the labor of love. Next slide, please. So here we have an example of some of what we did to begin to think about our own model. So I'm going to kind of walk through the buckets. For us, the impact was we wanted to have a dedicated social and emotional space that was peaceful, had a nature experience in it in an urban setting, because what we recognize is that because we're located right where we are, there wasn't much greenery, like there's natural greenery, like we have a turf field, but that's not real greenery. And we wanted to say, make a space right there on that major intersection that reflected some nature there. We also knew we wanted to beautify the neighborhood and create, again, that natural element. And then we also knew that we wanted to tackle academics and think about how can we create a learning environment for showing care for living things, plants, bees, birds, like just create that opportunity for our students to have an experience outside of what we normally see with the hustle and bustle of city life. And then to create empathy as well. And then the last impact bucket for us was thinking about all abilities learning space. We have students who have wheelchairs. We also have students who have, some challenges, maybe walking, and we wanted to make sure that the space that we created was accessible to all students. So then we thought about like short-term outcomes. What would be something that we would get quickly, from creating those impact areas? And so it was like, okay, they'll learn a little bit about science, about vegetables and herbs and how they grow. We would have created a space that was outside that had a dual purpose. It would be beautiful. It would be an intentional use of space, but it would also just add that natural beauty that we were looking for. So that would be a very quick turnaround. We also thought about, hey, we're doing mindfulness and social emotional learning work. If this outdoor space exists in the way we want it, we now create an oasis almost outside of our school building that actually creates a living environmental space where we can actually continue to work, but also tackle some of those academics without being confined to the four walls of a classroom. And then we also recognize that access for all meant that no student, regardless of their abilities, will be left out of the opportunity to have that experience. when we thought about activities and outputs, and that's still like a place of like, hey, we're still working through like, what does this look like? What does this sound like? How do we make it happen? We're just like, okay, it creates a teaching space for our outdoor classroom. It became an art space with murals in the garden. We added musical instruments through PVC valves because we had such creativity amongst our music teacher and all of those specialists that we have in our building that they started creating those other elements in our garden. It gave us space for students to walk, breathe in the air, and rejuvenate for the day as they also engage in learning. And then it also will give us sensory experiences to reset for learning, and then create a learning space for all students regardless of their abilities again. So we kind of just brainstorm what those things could look like. So currently, the exciting news for us at Turner is that we are actually in the process of revamping that very garden that you saw in that picture as we sit here talking right now. And they're taking and doing our redesign work at the ground level to really get it going. And we are in the process of really creating that design and that space that we knew that we really wanted to see as at our school. And although COVID is happening, it's still, something that we are looking forward to as a school team. And that should be it for my slides. I think now it's time for a poll question.
Yes, Rhonda had an excellent question that came up as she was creating hers. And Rhonda, do you want to introduce the question while I get it set up?
Okay, so my question was around thinking, like when we think about this work, a lot of times we're always thinking about, how do we make this happen? And so the question more or less was like, how do we think big, like think outside of those boxes and those confinements that always, kind of give us constraints when we think about what the work we're doing or what we may want to accomplish. As I'm talking, I'm trying to make my screen a little bigger so I can actually read it verbatim to you guys. And my screen is actually, okay, because it's giving me a tough time. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Dream big. That was Rhonda's takeaway
Yes.
that I really liked. Dream big. What do you envision for your school garden? What if you're not just stuck with what you have on hand, what you can make do with? What could it be? So you can head to slido.com again. You use the code 89493 again, and then it should be prompting you to fill in here. What do you envision for your school garden? Beauty. Shade structures, so crucial. And more beautiful artwork. A space for all teachers to bring classes outdoors. Yes. Serious food production. Buy-in. An outdoor escape. Teamwork. Yeah, that's the beauty of school gardens, right? People can come together in different ways. Set up garden boxes with herbs and vegetables. Yeah, where children can do the planting and learn about working together. A small gazebo for academic learning outside. Yes, spaces for people to engage outside in the ways that they want. Ooh, a 4-acre outdoor classroom. Nice. You guys have a lot of ideas. I love it. More project-based learning in each advisory. An improved watering system. Truth. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rhonda, for sharing that. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I know you have to hop off in just a minute. One question came up in the chat box, and since I know you have to hop off, I'm gonna ask it of you now. Lisa Washington said she loved the collaboration that was done to create the focus. Was your principal involved?
Yes, so we have Mr. Eric Bethel was our principal. Our new principal is Ms. Jessica Johnson. She was our assistant principal. Mr. Bethel is really big on our school community. So we had a really big initiative around like social emotional learning, mindfulness, having a garden, creating that community-based kind of learning. So he was super supportive of it. And our current principal, who has taken over this past school year, also just kind of she picked up the torch, and she is also super supportive of it. I believe some of my colleagues should be on this call today. If not, they are definitely involved in getting back into the garden work, because we actually have a brand new team member who's actually facilitating our garden, because I'm not the one with the green thumb. I just love nature. So that's just something else to know as well, guys. Like, it's just really a cool thing, and I love being outside in nature. So it works both ways. So just getting involved in the work has been really, really awesome along the way. And we have a super supportive administration team.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Thank you for sharing about Turner. It's really exciting to see what's happening there. And up next is Lola, DC Bilingual.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay. So hello, everyone. So watching Rhonda's presentation just gave me this overwhelming feel of just love to be in this room with you all. I know the feeling of being around school garden folks and teachers, and really that desire to just make overseeing the garden and the culinary and gardening and wellness programming at our school. So because we have this department of food and wellness at DC Bilingual, which is unique, not a lot of schools have that, it's even more important that we have a why. Why do we exist? What justifies the point of having a department of food and wellness? And so when I think about logic models and how we why our programming should exist, why folks should fund us, why my principals should continue to keep me employed, I do use logic models to start thinking about those fundamental pieces and impacts of our work. And our garden is huge. It's almost 7,000 square feet. And we've got all kinds of elements that you can kind of see in this picture. We've got herbs and flowers and raised beds and a fish pond with koi and compost and a climbing hill that's been falling apart for years. So we've got lots of the spaces and elements. We've got a lot of the what to a garden. And each year with my team, I have to think about, well, what is our purpose, and how are we going to accomplish this? And so it's really important too, because there's lots of people who use our garden. Our garden is used for recess. Our garden is used for outdoor academic classes when teachers want to borrow the space for like an outside reading time or a science project or other analysis outdoors. It's used by our culinary and gardening workshops. We do grow ingredients in there for our self-prep kitchen. And then we also use it to host student-led programming, such as like a school farm market and pop-up restaurants. So, as well as volunteer and family engagement. So in order to really tie all those things together, we first began to like look into how to develop our why by looking at the whole school, whole community, whole child model. So if we could go to the next slide. This is an image that you'll see more of going forward. OSSE just adopted it last year as a way to talk about health and wellness in schools. And we've been using it at DC Bilingual for the past 3 years. And what it means, what's the kind of the guiding principle is that you want to create a school where children are healthy, safe, challenged, supported, and engaged. And in order to do that, you have to coordinate practices and policies across different sections of this blue circle around the green center. So you want to, it's not just about at a school garden, it being done by just the science teacher, as we know, or just the food corps service member, or, it doesn't just live with one department. In order to really have it be a community holistic approach, we want to be involving all these different folks around the wheel. We want to be thinking about, how does a garden play into staff wellness? How does a garden and a wellness program align with the needs of the facilities team on staff? How do we collaborate with the counselors at our school and the psychological needs of our students? And so I'm showing this as just something to take a look at, because in our logic model, you'll notice that I don't really mention a lot of academic pieces, even though we do touch upon academics are an activity that take place in our garden. Fundamentally, I think the purpose of our garden and wellness program is connection. Next slide, please. So we think a lot about 4 main areas when we're looking at developing a logic model for our garden. One of them is cultural connections to the food that we grow and consume. And I shared this picture here to just tell a little story real quick. This is my beginning team at DC Bilingual, Ana and Virginia Guzman, who work with me still in the kitchen. And during my first year at DCB, I've grown up in the Latino community, and I've never, before coming to DC Bilingual, known that beets were a thing that would be popular with Salvadoran families. When I was planting the garden, I was like, oh, okay, no, cilantro makes sense, growing chiles makes sense, even cabbage makes sense to make repollo. But something that was pretty high in demand once I started harvesting it were beets. And so I bring this up as a way to talk about how the reason I love growing those things in the garden is because when we harvest those things, everyone can have a story about a recipe that they like to make, or not everyone, but lots of people at our school, which is majority Latino. They might talk to me. It might give them the feeling or the power to say, I know a healthy recipe that I'd like to share with you, and maybe you can put it on the website. We like to grow things that kids see at home, in the cuisine at home, so that they can realize it's not just a home food that they eat, it's something that this is what it looks like when it's in the ground. And then also just having that feedback loop of, okay, this is what we're growing now. What else should we be growing? What else would you like to be able to take home and see the life cycle of in the garden? So that's very core to how we connect with food service and the culinary education in our program. Another part, key impact to our programming, is developing ecophilia, which is, ecophilia is a word that means developing a love and an intimacy with the environment. So a desire for individuals, we have this instinctual desire to connect with nature. And I bring this up as an impact that we want to have on our children, because many of our children don't have spaces to be outside and playing and exploring. And many of their first experiences with nature take place in our school garden. It might be the only backyard they have. And so we want to develop programming, events, and other opportunities for our children and our staff and our family members to cultivate that love. And so that as they grow up and as they pass through this world, they feel, if something happens to our planet, they feel hurt. If someone litters, it hurts. And you can't feel that emotional connection unless you've developed some love for the space itself. And I showed this, I included this picture here because I came into the garden one day after school, And these kids were part of the after school program. And they had just decided to pick a bunch of stuff in the garden, which is fine. I plant plenty of things because I know kids are going to pick things and birds are going to pick things and everyone's going to pick something. But they had picked all of these things and they felt so comfortable, not only just picking the ingredients, but as you can see, the little young one on the right is packaging some to take home to his family. And then they were going to create a little restaurant in the garden. They had this whole like play happening of like, this is our nature restaurant. We want people to eat nutritious food out here in the garden. This was not something that I had like directed as a lesson plan. This was not a book I had read to them. This is just like play that they came up on their own. And I think that's a really good example of how like children have this natural ability to connect and feel comfortable in the outdoors when we create the space for them to do so. Another way that we manage to develop ecophilia amongst the adults, because that's important too. Lots of adults are sometimes like, ugh, and not super comfortable with being outdoors. But when some things that we've, chosen to do, it's definitely keeping a common calendar. We use Google Calendars at our school. And so having a garden calendar where people can sign up either to have one-on-one meetings with families. Almost all of our home visits at the beginning of the year actually take place in the garden because it's a comfortable space for many of our families to meet with teachers the first time. Also, we use the space for special lunches when teachers want to hold like special group lunches as an incentive for their children. It's a way to, just make the garden another room of the school. And then additionally, we actually have it as a listed benefit for our staff that if they want to, they can rent out the garden. It doesn't cost them anything, it's free, for parties. So sometimes we have like birthday parties for kids, for staff members, kids or families. We've had baby showers in the garden. And it's a way just to show them like, this is another beautiful option for you to take. Next slide, please. And so you can see here, this is kind of a squishy view, but a couple other impacts that we really care about making with our programming and under our department is also creating a space for students and community members to care for their mental health. And what this can look like is setting up like intentional regular meetings throughout the year with our student support team. This year we're looking to conduct trainings and participate in trainings with our team and other team members of the school on trauma-informed practices that can take place in the garden. And also just designing lots of little nooks and spaces to sit in the garden, because when you can come in the garden, it's nice to just be able to have a private area, a private place to sit and talk one-on-one with your teacher or with someone else, a quiet place where someone can practice their self-regulation techniques. And also we like to include like tasks in the garden that when people plan breaks with students who need them at our school, they often ask me like, what's something, Joey can do in the garden during his 10-minute break every week? And it's like, they can feed the fish. They can pick 5 things that smell good. They can help sweep the paths. Like there's lots of little sort of meditative and calming pieces that tools we can give to teachers and our student support staff in the garden. And lastly, last impact I just want to mention is also just providing tools and resources for families to make and share nutritious options with the community. So this also connects up to the first impact about making sure that we're growing culturally relevant ingredients and having culturally relevant pieces in the garden, but also by making it possible for families to share things that they've learned for the first time with an ingredient that they've never tried before. So hosting workshops in the gardens with either members of our team or outside chefs or even parents who want to teach a cooking technique or a new recipe or any kind of yoga in the garden. Like there's lots of different, again, using that calendar to be open to people, using the space, sharing their knowledge with the community in a way that helps everyone feel good. So yeah, I think that's the spiel I got. And we actually have a little question here, to a poll to the group as well, related to kind of what I said at the beginning, which is something that I think we all probably think a lot about is connection to the garden. And so a question that you might want to ask, I'm curious from the group, is there a group in your community that you're not already working with? Who you'd like to see get more involved in your garden-based efforts? And feel free to add more details into the chat box. Give that a minute. Okay. Well, I'm glad some people got it all covered. But I think it's not surprising to me that the majority of us still want to reach out to more. And hopefully we're all sharing some ideas today on how to do that. So thank you for giving me time.
Thanks so much, Lola. Up next, we have Allie Arnold and Dwayne Thomas from KIPP-Webb Campus and Washington Youth Garden and Food Court.
Hey all. So yeah, I feel so lucky that I can continue to work with the KIPP-Webb Garden. I was a food corps service member there last school year, and now I am with Washington Youth Garden. And yeah, so much of what Lola said really resonated with me, and I think is really true of the KIPP-Webb Garden as well. Some pictures here I think really show the why for everyone, you know, the kids, why do we work in schools? And Washington Youth Garden's vision or mission is to connect youth with food, the land, and each other. And I think these pictures do a good job showing some of that. And we really do what we do so they can have a better, healthier, more beautiful future. But you can't work in a school without really a community of support. Like Lola was saying, it's really, everyone plays a role so that these students can have this beautiful experience. And yeah, so all teachers, staff, families really all make a difference in the culture of the school and ultimately our kids' lives. So I'm gonna start with our logic model on the next slide. And show you guys some of our impacts on the left is really community building, which shifted when I came on. But yeah, so community building, also social emotional learning, health and wellness, among some other things. But for the sake of this presentation, we're just going to mainly talk about that community building piece. And in the column over under the short-term outcomes, you can see, hopefully it's not too small, but that a part of this is that teachers, families, staff, students are aware that the garden is a space for them and feel comfortable using it personally. And some context for you guys is the KIPP garden is kind of tucked away behind the school a little bit. So families could be at the school for 4 or 5 years and maybe not even know that they have a garden because it is so tucked behind. So that's just one outcome, like very basic, that we want to have happen. And as well as that relationships are built around the garden and food. And that the space is inclusive and inviting to all, like Rhonda was speaking to before. and same with Lola, that people feel grounded and safe in the garden. It can be a space of healing. And so the next couple of pictures are going to show some of how we try to do this, our activities or outputs. And also you'll see some of our material resources. So on the next slide, so we have done, or I should say that KIPP-Webb, I believe, has had a food corps service member for the past 5 years now with Washington Youth Garden. And we have always done STEM and nutrition education in class lessons, like you see here with the worm bin, with crushing those tomatoes to simulate decomposition and you know, making sweet potato biscuits and saying whether they tried it, liked it, or loved it, with stickers on a chart. That's kind of like the basics of what Food Corps and Washington Youth Garden does. We limit it down to just kindergarten through 2nd grade to make space for more of the community building impacts that we wanted to focus on. So on the next slide, you can see some pictures of the garden from when I first started my term. And so the garden is really, really important, like was just said, as a space of healing, a space of for your mental health to come, and also a place for food production and for food access. And that was really important for me. And I also pretty soon noticed when, I don't know if you can really see, but in the back left of that picture is a sidewalk, and that's kind of like the entrance to the garden, kind of next to the picnic tables. And it slopes down on a hill and it's kind of uneven. And I'm an able-bodied person, and I walked down there and I was like, this is kind of uncomfortable for me to walk on. So, you know, I couldn't imagine someone else who might be in a wheelchair or something else try to walk in. There wasn't really like an entry point either, just kind of garden beds spaced out along this kind of unlevel hill too. And so I felt like there was an opportunity to do a lot more with the space than was happening. As well as, I'll also mention our school year and our growing season don't really match up, as I'm sure many of you know. Like summer is really the height of the growing season, and I really wanted to make that a space for food to grow for the community. So that was when Adopt the Garden was born, which Dwayne, I think we'll talk about a little bit later. That's actually how we met, but where parents, families, teachers could come out to the garden and help maintain it, water and weed, and also then take home harvests. So ideally a mutually beneficial situation for people. So the next slide shows some improvements we made, and also just some elements of the space to make it an inviting one, to make it an inclusive one, where everyone feels comfortable and safe. You see the gravel path there we put in, which was a lot of manual labor, I will say, digging out that trench and shoveling that stone dust and gravel on top. But almost immediately after that path went in, I saw an administrator come out who I had never seen out in the garden before, and she was commenting on how amazing it looked. And I was like, wow, okay, a path really does help sometimes, as well as for classroom management, of course, like having a place to say, oh, stay on the path can be really helpful when you have a group of students out there. You also see wood chips, and that really helped to kind of delineate the growing space around where the raised beds are. You see an herb spiral, maybe another beautiful space, and a stump circle in the very back there where the path leads to, which is another little nook. I love that word, Lola, you used, where, you know, people can have reading circles or do other small group circles. And on the right side, picnic tables, seating, benches, so important for gardens, having a place for people to sit and also gather, not just for lessons and teaching out there, but also for, you know, if you're doing any kind of potluck or honestly anything in a green space. Picnic tables are really useful, and seating. And that chalkboard too is really great for visuals and signage, which leads me to the next slide, which is signage, how important that is for engaging as many folks as possible. Visuals are just so helpful for people who might not be as good with reading and people who are. So you can see that there's some art there. Bringing art into a garden space is really, really lovely, especially when you involve the kids, of course. And, you know, having a name, like having that sign that says kale there can help when you're leading people through the garden. You're actually there to facilitate, but can also help when you're not there, and can help, you know, build that connection to the plants and to the garden. Because when you can name it, you can kind of feel more of a sense of ownership over the space. Okay, next slide. So this is Garden Club. One of the best parts of the garden, in my opinion, although it's so hard to say. But they lead our school garden markets and are really, really awesome at building community and, you know, bringing in people who pass by during dismissal and selling really cheap, beautiful produce for the school community. And it's really fun. It's, you know, actually, I was gonna say sometimes we have music playing, but we don't, and we should have music playing during school garden markets. But it's really just like a really communal, lovely time, and also really important for food access and for food justice. Okay, next slide, I think is Dwayne.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dwayne Thomas. I'm the current food corps service member at KIPP-Webb Campus. Also co-teach garden science at Center City, Trinidad, and we're partnered with the Washington Youth Garden. Yeah, that slide there is a picture of me with Garden Club, Najee, Trinity, and Summer. Just a typical Wednesday garden club after school, just being in the garden, having fun, enjoying the space. The sunflowers on the back fence line bring back memories. They're coming back now. There's a pollinator garden there that I'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, so coming into this service assignment was a little bit unique for me. I was already a parent at the school. My son's been at KIPP for the last 7 years. He started there in pre-K3. So I was a part of the school community already as a parent. And my wife and I volunteered quite a bit around the school. So we got an email from Allie talking about the Adopted Garden program over the summer. My son was away at camp. So we say, why not? Let's take a week and go out to the garden and see what's going on. So we saw how wonderful the space was, the wonderful work that was being done there, and that Allie and the Washington Youth Garden was doing with the garden. And we started having conversations, and one conversation led to another conversation. And before you know it, I joined Food Corps. So Food Corps' why is that they want to make sure that all of the students at the schools that they partner with know what healthy food is, that they care where it comes from, and that they eat it every day. So I adapted that why coming into my work. And it was already tying right into what my why already was for wanting to do the work in the first place, which I'm a my son is fourth generation in this community. I'm actually from this community. I've lived here my whole life. I live here now. I'm raising kids here. So my vested interest in the community is just to improve the overall quality of life for the people who live in this community. And I was kind of fulfilling that work before Food Corps with being a boxing coach, volunteer boxing coach, wasn't getting paid for it, just using it as a way to connect with the youth and try to teach them some life skills through boxing. Like I said, I'm fourth generation in this, my family's been in this community for 4 generations. So I kind of felt like that would, my familiarity with the culture in this community would be a definite plus coming into the work that was in front of me. So I know I'm familiar with some of the resources that are deficient in the community, some of the things that plague the community, like diabetes and high blood pressure and drug addiction and abandonment and all of those things. I'm very familiar with those things. So I thought coming in, being familiar with them will help me with my work. So transitioned into the position, which was awesome because of what I inherited was so structured and so supportive with the Washington Youth Garden and then food court staff, and then me being blessed enough to have Allie to usher me into the work that she was just doing, and be up close and personal and making sure that I, had the information and the resources that I needed to do the work. It was awesome. So as she started walking me around the school and introducing me to everybody and letting everybody know that I would be the one doing the work, I started to notice that, the students would be really happy when they saw her coming and their eyes would light up. And then she had to tell them that, she wasn't going to be there the following school year. And I noticed right away that they got sad. And like I said, I'm familiar with the abandonment issues that a lot of people in this community have. So I immediately made a mental note to know that I wanted to be mindful of that when I was starting to try to develop relationships with them, because you come in and you develop the relationships and then you're gone. So it's I know how that feels. I'm one of them. I have those abandonment issues based on, my dad not being around growing up. So the transition went smooth. I was able to get familiar with I was already familiar with the school, of course, some of the staff, but I was able to get familiar with the work through the support system that I had. And I started doing it. And I came in and I wanted to establish myself first. And I was able to do that. There was a lot of things in place to help me do that. Once I felt established, then I wanted to enhance what was already happening. I wanted to do some meaningful work myself. So, and in establishing myself, I also, I didn't want to come across as a gatekeeper. I started to notice some of the staff and students started to feel like they knew I was the garden man. I was the garden guy, Mr. Thomas. I'm the one with the food, but they were feeling like they had to go through me to get to it. It didn't seem like they were owning the space. They were feeling like it was my space as opposed to their space. So that's one thing I noticed when I was establishing myself. But then I wanted to enhance what was happening there with regard to building community even stronger than what was already going on. So I started to try to think outside of the box, which was always encouraged by my colleagues, and do some other things. So I joined the DC Beekeepers Alliance, and I took a course to become a beekeeper. And with the wonderful support from them, I was able to bring beehives into the garden, which weren't there at first. So now there's 2 hives there. We have a connection with DC natives. And because of that connection, we were able to add a new pollinator garden to the garden this year, which was awesome. We entered the garden in OSSE 2019 Best School Garden Award competition, and the garden club wrote essays, and we wound up winning the coveted Golden Shovel, the 2019 Best School Garden Award, one of them. So stuff like that. So those are some of the accomplishments that I was able to achieve in the enhancement department. And then I also wanted to expand as well. And through enhancing, we were able to expand our community and our relationship. So we have a relationship now with the DC Beekeepers Alliance and DC natives, Sally and Thorne. They're so wonderful. So yes, we expanded. I was able to do that. And I felt good about it. Then of course, COVID hit. So we're doing all this wonderful work and there's a lot of great things going on, and then that happens. And that's a big roadblock when it comes to building community, because the rule is stay away from everybody. So that challenged us to try to figure out creative ways to continue to build community and do the work that we were doing amidst the pandemic. And I think we pulled it off. We came up with a remote learning system that we're still establishing and still enhancing right now, but we were able to do, like I did a virtual garden tour that went on the school social media website, so the students and families were still able to see the garden even though they couldn't come out. Because I was spooked when it first happened. I didn't know if we were going to be able to grow food, if we were going to be, and if we could grow it, are we going to be able to share it with people? So the fact that yesterday I was able to give away 4 crates of produce as a part of the food distribution that takes place at KIPP every Wednesday, that's awesome. Like, we're growing food, we're still sharing food with the community and with families. So next week we're launching the thing that led me to doing this work. The Adopt a Garden program is relaunching next week. So families will be able to sign up and get a slot and come in and spend some time out there with me and just enjoy the space and harvest and do some work and weed and prune and whatever they want to do, just enjoy the space. So it's all full circle. We're right back to where it all started for me. That's pretty much what I have. Unless, Allie, you think I left something out?
That's great. I think the next slide is just the Instagram live that you guys did.
Yes.
And what's the next slide? Oh, the grow
at home kits.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. So like I said, we came up with a remote learning program and we were trying all kinds of stuff. So one thing that was real instrumental in this being successful was we did a survey, and we sent the survey out to families, and that was huge because it allowed us to have a deeper connection with the families because the teachers didn't have to be a liaison for that relationship. And that was huge. Like, it's so much easier to talk directly to somebody as opposed to talking to them through someone else. So that was huge. And through that survey, we were able to find out what people's point of interest were. So grow at home kits that you're looking at right now. We sent home a coconut core, a couple different types of seeds, and I did a how-to video. And then we got these kits out to the families. We sent out emails. They came up to the schools and picked them up. Some of them I delivered myself to the homes of people that couldn't get out. And we had about 16 people that actually got the kits in their hands. We did a virtual cooking night with me and Sarah, which is another food course service member, where she was in her kitchen with her daughter. I was in my kitchen with my son. And we did a mac and cheese and salad cooking. And we had families on the Zoom meeting, and we got a chance to connect with them that way. So yes, that's some of the remote learning stuff that we were able to do amidst the pandemic that was able to allow us to still do the work that we love doing, in strange times.
And our poll question is something about accessibility. If you could pull that up, Brianne.
So this question, how do you work to make your school garden more accessible to your school community already? There's a bunch of different options you can select. And then feel free also, if you have additional thoughts, to add them in the chat box too. Apologies, I had to redo this question, and apparently I accidentally selected single instead of multiple choice, so you can only select one. Okay, it looks like a lot of people think about how they can make their space accessible to all. Volunteer days, super great way to bring people out into the garden. Some people still working on getting their school gardens ready to go. Lots of good options on here. Seriously, we piloted the school garden markets for Washington Youth Garden just, what was it, a year and a half ago. And if I could advocate for one thing, having those school garden markets have been really remarkable in terms of us improving our community connections. Thank you so much, Allie and Dwayne. Thank you very much. Definitely feel free to share if there are other things that you do to connect to your community. Feel free to put them in the chat box. Otherwise, now we're going to pass it over to Sam Ullery to share.
Great, thank you.
Research.
Hi everybody. This is really great to be able to kind of follow up all these great examples and try to bring this all together a little bit through the lens of benefits for school gardens. And so whenever I talk about benefits to school gardens in person, everyone's usually nodding their heads because I'm not saying too many things that people don't already know. However, I do want to talk about this because I think it's essential that folks understand that there is research and that supports the work that you are all doing so that you can be more intentional. So it is well documented that a large body of research shows that garden-based learning has positive impacts on students' grades, knowledge, attitudes, physical health, and behavior. And I saw a comment earlier that said, is there anything a school garden can't do? No, I don't think so. I challenge folks to find something that is not enhanced by getting kids out into a school garden. There's also a lot of research, as you heard from folks such as Lola, that there's research that supports stronger connections between school and the community. So if you're asking yourself, what is my garden program's why, which is, I think a lot of folks are asking themselves right now, and if you're looking to create a more purposeful garden program, and or if you're seeking out research or other things to support you in the outcomes that you've identified or the activities that you're doing in the garden, or lastly, if you're needing to justify the establishment of a new garden program, these next few slides are especially for you. And it's actually a bit overwhelming when you start to look at just the volume of research that is out there that really supports garden-based learning. But fortunately, this research is I think, very well organized and accessible through various databases such as the NAAEE EE research database, the USDA has school garden research page, National Farm to School Network, and the Children in Nature Network. And these are all links that will be available on the slide deck when this is shared, and we can put them on the resource page as well. And all this research can be used to support teachers and garden educators in creating a garden program with intention. So Rhonda, Lola, Allie, and Dwayne, they each shared how their programs serve to benefit students, and they've also shared how their program outcomes, which align with benefits. I kind of use the word benefits and outcomes interchangeably here, that I'm about to go over. So they've talked about these things, and I'm going to show you how it fits into this research. So let's look over these. It's impossible to, and one last thing to note is that it's really impossible to isolate one benefit or outcome from one another. For example, if a garden program is just really focused on using that programming to increase academic performance. So next slide, please. Then the students will more than likely, even though they're out there for academic purposes, they will more than likely benefit in more ways than only the academic achievement. And I should note that there is research that shows that school garden programs that are more aligned with the school's priorities are more likely to succeed. And we know that one of school's priorities is academic achievement. So I do recommend that you consider how your garden program might support increased academic achievement among students. So Rhonda, for example, shared that one of the outcomes of the Turner Garden is for students to understand how to care for living things, which is such a classic prime example of how school gardens can be used to connect garden-based learning with science learning. And there's a very strong body of research that supports this outcome. We know that students that have school garden programs incorporated into their science curriculum score significantly higher on science achievement tests than those students that are taught by strictly traditional classroom methods. And here in DC, we also know that students that are enrolled in schools with school garden programs tend to have higher average nutrition knowledge scores on the health and PE assessment. Again, there's a lot more research, but just wanted to highlight those. Next slide, please. Okay, Allie and Dwayne shared that one of their outcomes at the KIPP Garden is to help kids and adults become healthier and happier through gardening. Research supports this outcome very strongly. There's a lot of research out there that says children who are familiar with growing their own food tend to eat more fruits and vegetables. Again, that probably makes sense to a lot of people, but I want you to know that there is research out there to support that. Also, those students are more inclined to continue eating healthy through adulthood. So it's not just that they're eating healthy in that class or in that after-school club. They're gonna, if they do it frequently enough, they're gonna continue that habit through adulthood. Also, gardening during childhood in school gardens exposes children to healthy food. They also get exercise. I was thinking about the KIPP Garden again with all that mulch. You got to get the PE teacher out there. That's a great, those wheelbarrows and mulch, that's great physical activity. Positive social interactions lead to a lifetime of gardening. So next slide. School gardens, and Lola talked a little bit about the magic of school gardens, and I love that she said that. I also see magic in them, and they take on a life of their own. They tend to reflect the students, the teachers, the parents, and the community that care and work in them. And you can find things like fairy houses, bug hotels, and forts. And this is, I think, particularly important when we look at the increased social and emotional health benefit as school begins to reopen, because spaces like school gardens where students will be spending both structured and structured time outside are places where they will develop values like empathy, respect, and perseverance, and skills like team building, leadership, and craftsmanship, which is going to be so vital when we when schools start to reopen. Rhonda talked about her garden outcome being a peaceful, natural space, and Lola talked about students having the opportunity to take breaks in the garden, and there's lots of research that supports these things. We know that school gardens serve as safe places for students, and there's studies that show that large number of students say they feel safe, calm, relaxed, and happy when they're in school gardens. And kids that spend time in gardens are more likely to accept people that are different than themselves. And there's a particular study of third and fourth and fifth graders that showed that as they spent more time in the garden, they had increased self-understanding, interpersonal skills, and cooperative skills when compared to non-academic students. Next slide, please. This is another school garden market. I think that's a great example of school and community connections, and school gardens definitely create those. It's one of the benefits. Lola talked about how one outcome of her program is that community members choose to use the space for learning, recreation. I think there was a wedding, if I might be wrong, Lola, in the GCD garden, or there was going to be. And this is just a space for community members to spend time. And Allie and Dwayne talked about one of their outcomes at KIPP was to foster strong connections to the community space where teachers, family, and staff could spend time. And there's a ton of research that supports this, including actually a benefit for teachers. Teachers that are in school gardens, schools with school gardens, tend to work there longer and have higher workplace morale. And there's a lot of research that shows that what kids do in the garden, and Dwayne talked about this, and so did Lola, spreads to the greater community, to the larger community. Next slide, please. Increased access to nature. This one is even more important, I think, for students that otherwise may not have access to nature, like Lola mentioned, and it may be one of their few or only intimate experiences with the natural world. And so learning in natural environment, whether it's a school garden or a farm or a park, boosts, there's research that suggests that it boosts performance in reading, writing, math, science, and social studies. So just being outside and learning has a benefit. And it reduces stress, anger, and aggression. And then lastly, the last slide is that this is an intrinsic benefit to the environment itself. So gardens can conserve rainwater, they can increase habitat for native wildlife, and it's, this is school grounds as well. Trees reduce schooling costs, and that's my alarm. I just finished. So thank you all. I guess the last thing I want to say is, if your garden program is having an impact on students, but you're not able to measure that impact, then how can you justify that program to the administration or your partners? So I just wanted to put a plug in there for folks, so no matter what outcomes you decide for your program, just be sure that they're measurable. Otherwise, how do you know that your school program is benefiting students in the way that you're intending? So consider developing a tool such as a survey that can help you measure so that you can understand where your program needs to improve and if you're meeting those benchmarks. So that's my little piece, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks so much, Sam. So the next portion that we have here is just some space for a little bit of question and answer. So if you have questions, put them in the chat box in the interim while we let some questions pop up here. I'm just going to share with you guys some information about what is coming up. So Laura, can you hit again for the next transition? So first, if you are interested in attending more than just this one webinar, if you want to be a part of the whole Summer Institute program, you should have received an email that will include the link for the Schoology account. This is the access code here listed on the screen right now. You can set up an account in there, and what it will bring you to is essentially a whole course of resources on what we talked about today, what we're going to be talking about in the next coming weeks. Perhaps even more importantly than that, the Summer Institute is not just designed as a series of webinars, but really as a space to allow you all to plan your school gardens and how you will use them. So on the Schoology account, there is the garden planning packet. Super exciting name, but the purpose of it is to give you the space to think through, how do you want to do this? How are you going to do this? Maybe in the fall, maybe in the spring. Think through what is your why. And so that is the assignment for those of you interested in getting the professional learning units, or just for those of you interested in really digging deeper and doing the work for these webinars. There is the school garden logic model that you saw every one of the schools that filled out today. That template is available for you to fill out too, and for you to think about what is your school garden why, and what are the outcomes that you want for your students. If you have your why, and if you have your outcomes, Sam's call for measuring success becomes much easier. When you know what you want to achieve, it's easier to measure it. And the same for the activities as well. So that is available on the Schoology accounts. In addition to that, all of the links for all of the webinars and the discussion sessions are available on there. So if you haven't already, I really would encourage you to go and sign up. We do have to admit you, so it might take us a little bit to get everybody in, but please, there's a bunch of resources in there. Garden-based teaching has been happening for a very long time. This isn't the first training that has been happening about that, and we want to give you all access to some other resources beyond just what this particular training is offering. The next discussion session will be Tuesday, July 14th at 3 p.m. It is the corresponding part to this webinar. So it is about you coming with what is your school why? What is your why for your school garden? Come to that discussion session. We'll break you up into different breakout groups. It may be based on your school, if there's a big cohort of people from a single school, or it may be by what your why is, what you're interested in. We'll be sending out a survey in the next day or two about that to help break out those different breakout groups. That's the discussion session. The next webinar will be next week, Thursday, and it is with Evan Hinsman from OutTeach and then Ronnie Webb from the Green Scheme, talking about designing your garden and putting together your gardening team. Because if one thing has come across today, it is that truly school gardens are team efforts, and that's part of the process. So the questions for today, I see a couple of questions that have come up in here. First, what is KIPP? Dwayne, will you answer that?
Sure. KIPP is a network of charter schools. My son's been a student there for 7 years, and they're scattered all over the country. I think DC has about 5 different campuses, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, it's a charter school. There's about 4 classes for every grade level. So it's a fairly large school. It's broken down into academies. So there's Connect Academy, which is pre-K 3 through kindergarten. Then there's Spring Academy, which is 1st grade through 4th. And then there's Northeast Academy, which is the middle school. So you stay there until 8th grade. And then the college preparatory, KIPP College Prep, is about 5 minutes from the campus that I work at, the Webb Campus in Northeast DC. But yeah, it's a pretty good educational system. I've been around it, like I said, as a parent for about 7 years, and I've seen the wonderful work and how hard they go for our babies. Like they put in long hours, long school years. Their days are longer than DC Public. Their school year is longer than DC Public. And it's to my understanding that they get paid less, but you wouldn't know it if you saw the culture inside the school. They really work hard.
Thanks, Dwayne.
Yes.
We've also gotten several questions about composting and also several questions about bees. And the interesting thing about the structure of the Summer Institute this year is we do have these discussion sessions that are able for us to pull in extra support even than who's on these webinars. And so one thing that's coming to me is that Caroline or Tony, maybe we need to do a little session of bees in our Ask a Gardener discussion session, and certainly composting should be part of that Ask a Gardener session too. So definitely feel free. We're not going to dive into composting too much right now. We'll save that one for either Ask a Gardener or the school garden, or not, sorry, the school curriculum, which will be the last webinar and discussion session. Those would be excellent topics for those two. Nadia asks, can you give an example of ways to measure outcomes? Any of our presenters want to tackle that one?
I think that I listed some on the logic model, some ideas of ways to measure these things. There's lots of different ways to measure outcomes. It can be like a number, for example. Some of the things that we measure are just like number of participants or number of times a year that we have these events and who's coming more than once. Another thing is there's different ways to collect data, especially with younger children. You could do like for probably 3rd through 5th grade short surveys, or with older, with adults surveys, but with younger children, I've learned some ways of doing discussion groups to guide conversations and get kind of like anecdotal feedback that demonstrates that they've had a change of attitude. And I'd be happy to share some of those, some of the surveys and tools that we have at DC Bilingual.
just really briefly, being a food corps service member as opposed to a full-time teacher, my outcomes are measured a little bit differently. I've noticed that most of my outcomes, I can measure them, but it's intangible. Like, there's no way for me to record it and show you what my outcomes are. It's just from my observations. It's me watching the students and having relationships with them. I can see if I'm having an impact on them through that. But for me to try to record it and show you how I got those outcomes, it was kind of difficult. I don't get to spend as much time with the students as their teachers do. I only get an hour with them for 4 weeks, or for 8 weeks, an hour per week for 8 weeks. And then I'm off to a whole new group of kids. So it's a little more difficult for me to measure outcomes. But Allie helps me with it a lot. She's a really good record keeper. And she's really on me about making sure I'm recording what's happening. What am I doing? How long am I spending doing this? She helps me with it a lot, but most of it's intangible for me, I've noticed. Like, I couldn't show you on paper with my outcomes. Doesn't mean I'm not getting good outcomes. It's just I can't show you.
Well, I would disagree with Dwayne, because that school garden essay that his kids wrote, to me, that was a measurement of success. And so I think just finding ways, it's one thing to measure it, and it's another thing to share it. And so I think that's, once you've measured it, you really have to think about, especially when it's not a number or something like Nadia had mentioned, like really hard and fast. The challenge becomes, like, how do I really share this impact so that it can be digested by other people and so that it's impressive.
Yeah, I encourage you all, if you haven't looked on the OSSE website for the essays from the Best School Garden Awards over the past several years, it is truly amazing to hear the impact of school gardens on students themselves in those essays. It is not always easy to pull those essays together, but it is really lovely to be able to see them. Can you share some resources for parents who will be distance learning or homeschooling this year due to COVID? And Sam just shared in the chat box the Gilda Allen Best School Garden Award, so you can click through and look at that.
I'll say that some really wonderful resources I've seen online are coming out of a lot of the garden-based organizations that are here in the city. So I know that Washington Youth Garden had originally some things that were going online, some videos that were recorded. Food Prints is creating some great short videos on engaging children in garden and cooking. City Blossoms also has videos online for different stages, early growers, and also the Mighty Greens program to engage high schoolers. And so rather than like reinvent the wheel at your own school, take a look at some of these resources that are out there. Nationally, there's also the Edible Schoolyard project and other just national organizations that are doing online videos that can be sent or to your community alongside another type of prompt. So that's something like we learned at DC Bilingual, for example. Like I was able to do some cooking videos at home with my son and some lives in the garden, but realistically, like my capacity to become a one-person like learning channel is not super great. So I'm definitely trying to promote what other people are doing well. And it's a great way for kids and families to connect and know that they're not the only garden in the world. And this is a global hobby and lifestyle.
I would be remiss if I didn't shout out that City Blossoms and Common Good City Farm and Washington Youth Garden worked together to put together the DC Virtual Farm Field Trip video series. And in fact, if any of you do have younger kids at home, there is a virtual field trip notebook that you can go and do at your home, watch the videos of us at the garden spaces that tie into those videos. And then there's actually a live competition that goes until July 19th. And so if you share what's special about nature near you, you can be eligible to win with your families planters and City Blossoms cookbooks and produce and a kids cooking kit from Common Good City Farm. So I would recommend you check that out, and I'll throw the link in the chat box too. Anything else any of the presenters want to share around that? Otherwise, I think that that's a good moment to stop. Okay, thank you everybody for hopping online today. I will be sending out a survey in the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that, in particular because it will help us with planning the discussion session. And I do really encourage everyone participate in the discussion session because that's your time to dig into what you want to get out of this. So thank you very much and have a great weekend.
Yeah.